You think you're worthy of an invitation, Renate? Our wedding was only for special people. That sentence from Lena's own mouth sliced through me like a cold, sharp blade. And right after that, the wedding photo they had hidden all this time dropped before my eyes, gleaming, polished, with both families present, except for the groom's mother. That night, Lena stumbled drunkenly into the house while Max was away. She smirked at me like I was something in the way. I told Max not to invite you. I made up a few things, just enough to keep him away from you. In that moment, I saw her clearly for who she was, a woman who had skillfully crushed the bond between a mother and her son. I tried to speak honestly with them both, but Max, the last hope I had, took his wife's side and treated my words like empty air. I stepped back quietly until something on Lena's phone turned my world upside down. A voice recording. Her voice sharp as a knife. Once the wedding's done, that's it. The assets will end up mine anyway. That old woman doesn't have much time left. At that moment, I realized the person I was facing wasn't a daughter-in-law. It was a predator, patient and disguised in cheap sweetness. And me, a 71-year-old mother, turned out to be nothing more than well-fed prey, raised by my own love. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Expose her? Or stay silent and let yourself become a walking wallet for someone to drain dry? What state are you living in? Hit subscribe and leave a comment. I want to hear your honest reaction. I never thought I would have to retell this story with a voice that trembles this much. During the 3 years of living under the same roof, I believed that genuine affection could still be enough to hold a home together. In the months of the pandemic when the world shut down, I gathered every bit of my pension to support Max and Lena. I wanted my son and my future daughter-in-law to keep their dream wedding intact. I bought wedding items, paid their rent, covered food, and covered everything from medicine to toilet paper. I told Max that when the pandemic passed, I would give him $200 for the two of them to take commemorative photos. He smiled and said, "Mom, you always think of me." I had believed that. Those days, I woke up each morning with the fragile hope that once the pandemic ended, I would put on the blush pink dress I had chosen to stand beside my son on the most important day of his life. I imagined myself hugging Lena, giving them my blessing, and believing that everything, no matter how hard, would eventually be worth it. But that hope turned to ashes with a single image that appeared on my phone screen. That day, while my hands were idle, I opened social media to skim through lighthearted news to pass the time. I wasn't looking for anything specific, only wanting to see how life outside was slowly recovering, until the picture of two people appeared. Max in the gray suit I had given him money to buy. Lena in the white dress I had contributed $800 to help her purchase. The two stood beneath the church archway, hands entwined, wearing satisfied smiles. The caption beneath made my heart go numb. "We are officially married." I looked closely at each frame. Photos of both families, bright, cheerful smiles, beautiful church decorations, but not me, not a single sign that the groom's mother had ever existed. I felt as if someone had slapped me hard across the face. The phone in my hand grew heavier and heavier until I had to set it on the table and take a deep breath just to steady my heartbeat. I didn't understand what was happening. I hadn't been informed, hadn't been asked, hadn't been invited. Worse than that, I had been hidden away as if my presence were something shameful. I brought the photos down to the living room. Max and Lena were watching a movie, looking unnervingly calm and happy. I asked softly, "What is this, Max?" Max jolted, his earbuds falling out of his hands. Lena stayed in her seat, her eyes flicking toward me briefly before turning back to the screen. That glance alone told me everything she knew I would find out. I turned the phone toward them. "You two got married? When? Why didn't I know?" Max stammered. "Mom, this was rushed. We just wanted something small." Only then did Lena smile, a smile designed with intention. She turned around, folded her arms, looked straight at me, and said in an utterly indifferent voice, "We only invited special people." 1 second of silence felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood frozen. My ears buzzed and a sharp pain pulsed through my chest beat after beat. That sentence wasn't merely a rejection. It was a blade twisting straight into my dignity. I asked again, "What do you mean?" Lena casually adjusted her hair. "Simple. Max and I wanted the ceremony to be perfect. We didn't want anyone making things uncomfortable." I looked at Max desperately. I hoped he would protest, hoped he would explain that Lena was exaggerating, hoped he would say that I was still his mother. But Max only bowed his head. He avoided my eyes as if I were a stranger passing by. I sat down, clasping my hands together to steady myself. "I supported you two through the whole pandemic. I thought I would get to see this moment." Max said nothing. Lena gave another faint smile. "We know, and we appreciate it, but a wedding is about the couple. Not everyone fits the atmosphere of such a big day." I couldn't say another word. Each sentence felt like a stone pressing down onto my chest. I searched my memories, trying to find something I had done that would justify them hiding this from me, but I found nothing. All I saw was myself grocery shopping for them because I feared they would get sick, saving every bit of my pension to ease their burdens, preparing small gifts just to see my son smile. But apparently, in their eyes, none of that mattered. I looked at Max again. "Why didn't you tell me? Just one word was all I needed." Max tightened his lips. That evasive posture told me he no longer stood on my side. He had chosen silence to avoid conflict with his wife. I felt like someone standing outside the door of a house I had built with my own hands, yet was no longer allowed to enter. The room grew so heavy I could barely breathe. I stood up to go to my room, but then turned back, unable to endure the humiliation gnawing at me. I asked, my voice tight yet clear, "So, who am I in this house?" Max looked up for the first time, meeting my eyes since the beginning of the conversation. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Lena placed her hand on her husband's shoulder, squeezing gently as if to remind him of something. Max bowed his head again, and at that exact moment, a notification sound chimed from Lena's phone. The screen lit up. The sender's name appeared, a name that squeezed my heart because I had never imagined such a possibility. I stared at the screen, unable to believe my own eyes, and in that moment, I knew the truth was far worse than being erased from a wedding. After the night I discovered the hidden wedding photo, I thought I had reached the limit of my pain, but it turned out to be only the first scratch in a long fracture leading to an abyss. When the pandemic ended and people began returning to their normal routines, I hoped my relationship with Max would heal at least in part. Yet everything remained like a wearisome dream, and I was the only one still holding on. When the city reopened, I continued paying rent for both of them. I covered the utility bills, the internet, and even the repair for the washing machine that kept humming in their apartment. I thought that once Max returned to work, he would at least thank me or give me some money to help out. But no, Max merely brushed past me in the mornings, threw his coat over his shoulder, avoided eye contact, and left as if I were nothing but air. At night, Max came home late, shoulders slumped, eyes averted. I once asked, "Did you eat yet? I cooked." He replied in a flat tone, "I ate at the office. I'm busy," and headed straight to his room. The door shut behind him, leaving a suffocating silence that I couldn't quite name. I told myself he was just stressed from work, but deep down I knew the truth was crueler. He was avoiding me because of the guilt Lena had planted in his mind. And instead of removing it, Max allowed it to grow. Lena, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. When the city reopened, she didn't return to work right away. She said her body hadn't stabilized after the pandemic and asked for more time off. I saw shopping bags at the door and new perfume in the air every time she walked in. She went to the spa, the nail salon, the hairdresser, one tea party after another, then off to fancy cafes. I didn't want to pry, but each time I glimpsed a floating receipt in the trash, my insides churned like water splashing against rock. One evening, I heard soft laughter coming from the kitchen. I walked closer. Lena was on a video call, face beaming, voice high and chirpy. I heard her say, "Hey, I'm so free these days. My mother-in-law covers all the rent. It's great. When someone's got your back, why rush back to work?" I stood frozen. My ears burned while my feet turned cold. It was the first time I heard her call me mother-in-law with such mocking contempt, like I was some kind of social benefit she was entitled to. Lena turned around, saw me there, but just lifted her chin, slid the phone into her pocket, and said blandly, "I was just chatting with a friend. Don't mind me." I forced a smile, nodded, but something inside me had begun to fester. In the days that followed, while I rose early to prepare breakfast, Lena would leisurely pull out a chair and rest her chin on her hand. I asked out of courtesy, "Lena, are you going to work today?" She replied with a long drawl, "I think I'll take more time off." "Still not feeling well. Hope you understand. And cleaning the house is a bit much. Could you help me?" Then she stood and walked back to her bedroom, leaving me in the kitchen with a hot pan and the invisible sting of a slap no one else could see. I tried to stay calm, kept telling myself that once Max got back on track, things would improve. But Max grew more distant and Lena bolder. She began treating me more like an unpaid maid than a mother-in-law. One day, while I was folding laundry in the living room, Lena frowned and said, "Fold it carefully. I can't stand it when my clothes aren't perfectly aligned." I bit my lip hard, forcing myself not to snap back. I was afraid Max would hear and think I was the one making everything worse. One afternoon, when Lena thought I had gone to the market, I returned home because I'd forgotten my wallet. The door was slightly ajar. I heard her voice sharp and bitter like a knife scraping wood. "My mother-in-law's pretty easy to handle. Just throw her a few grateful words and she opens her wallet. She's like a breathing purse, never runs out." A breathing purse? I had heard many insults thrown at mothers-in-law, but never one that made me feel so hollow. I stood by the door, my hand clutching the bag strap until my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to hear more, but my feet wouldn't move. I heard her friend ask, "Does Max know Lena?" Replied smug and satisfied. Why would he? I just say a few things and he thinks his mom's being difficult with me. Men are so easy to manipulate. I nearly dropped my wallet. Every word burned like acid on skin. So Max didn't drift away by his own choice. He was pulled by Lena's stories, crafted to deepen the gap between us, to turn me into a dim figure, pushed to the edge of his life. I stepped back and stood in the hallway for a long time. I couldn't bring myself to go in. My chest ached like it was being squeezed. I thought about the meals I saved for Lena, the headache pills I handed her when she said she was tired, the nights I stayed up waiting for Max to come home just to ask if he was okay. To her, all of that was just foolishness to exploit. I opened the door and tried to keep my face neutral. Lena flinched slightly, but recovered quickly. She smiled faintly. "Back from the market, Mom." I said nothing. I went to the kitchen, arranged the groceries as usual, trying not to show how my heart was quietly breaking. That night, I barely touched my dinner. Max came home late, nodded at me, and went straight to his room. I realized I was living with two people I once called family, yet they now felt like the most unfamiliar strangers. That night, before sleep, I lay silently in the dark, thinking about the years gone by. I thought about little Max, how he cried when he tripped, how he hugged me when scared, how he once told me I was the most wonderful woman in his world. But now those memories felt like images veiled by fog, blurry and far away. I was too tired to even turn on the nightlight. I drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by Lena's sharp, needling voice. I don't know when I started crying. The next morning, as I cleaned the living room, Lena walked out yawning. She passed by me, trailing a new perfume. She didn't stop, didn't look at me, but her voice pierced straight through my chest. With a mother-in-law like this, life's a breeze. I froze. The cloth slipped from my hand to the floor. Lena kept walking, never looking back, as if the words were nothing but a casual breath. But I knew she wanted me to hear. And I understood then the first storm had only just begun. That night, the house was so quiet, I could hear every tick of the wall clock. Max had texted earlier saying he was pulling an extra shift and told me not to wait for dinner. I cleaned up the kitchen, turned off a few lights, and was about to head to my room when the front door lock rattled loudly, making me jump. The door burst open and Lena staggered in, reeking of a mixture of alcohol and perfume. She kicked off her high heels in the middle of the floor, dropped her purse with a thud onto the chair, and raised her head with a crooked, mocking smile. I walked over instinctively and still asked Lena, "How much did you drink? Let me get you some water." She flopped onto the sofa, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, yet far more lucid than I expected. Lena looked me up and down, then let out a dry laugh like she'd just heard some ridiculous story. "You're always like this, aren't you, Renate? So gentle, so caring, so kind. It's exhausting just to look at you." I swallowed my sigh, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and set it on the table in front of her. "Here, drink some water, it'll help." Lena looked at the glass, then at me, and suddenly said something so raw, my hand froze in midair. "Who do you think you are in this house? Some kind of guardian angel? Or something even holier?" I tried to keep my tone calm. "I just want a peaceful home and for everyone to be well. That's normal for a mother-in-law." Lena laughed, threw her head back, the sound harsh and off-key. "Mother-in-law, hear that? You calling yourself that is hilarious. You're more like a bank account, one that walks, cooks, cleans, and shuts up." I sat on the chair opposite her, feeling my heart clench. "Lena, if something's bothering you, you can just tell me." She leaned on her knees, body swaying from the alcohol, but her words were sharp as needles. "I'll tell you straight then. You want to hear it? Fine. I banned Max from inviting you." Her words dropped into the living room like a stone shattering the calm surface. I stared at her face, feeling like I'd just been shoved off a ledge. "What did you say?" Lena shrugged, her expression like she was just recounting a casual anecdote. "The wedding, the church, the dress, the suit, all of it. I told Max if he invited you, I wouldn't marry him, and he chose me." She downed the glass of water, set it down hard, the sound sharp in the thick air. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. "But why? When did I ever treat you badly?" Lena rested her elbow on the armrest, chin in hand, her smile flattening into a cold line. "Because I want to. Because I don't want you involved in anything that's mine. Because I find you annoying. You show up and people start praising you, saying how kind you are, how much you sacrifice, how amazing you are. And what about me? I'm just the girl who married your son. I stayed quiet for a long time before I could speak. You're jealous of me, just over a few compliments. Lena laughed again, but her eyes were dark. No, I'm jealous of your place. Max worships you, and I'm just the one who came later. If I don't fight it, I'll live in your shadow forever. She leaned closer, voice slowing, enunciating every word. So, I pulled him away from you. I told him you didn't like me, that you nitpicked, that you saw me as a burden, that you gossiped with neighbors, that you made him choose between us, Lena said, all without blinking, like reciting a well-rehearsed script. I added a few spicy details, said you called me a leech, mocked the way my family lives. That stuff, Max heard it and instantly got furious. My throat felt dry. I never said anything like that. Lena shrugged again. Doesn't matter. What matters is that he believed it. He already felt guilty for living off of you. I just nudged that guilt and he started thinking you looked down on us. Then he felt sorry for me, sided with me, and drifted away from you. Easy. I looked at my hands resting on my lap, veins raised under the skin. 30 years of raising a son, unraveled thread by the calculated lies of a woman who'd only been in our home for a few years. Have you ever thought about how that made me feel? Being pushed to the margins of my own son's life? I asked, voice low and gravelly. Lena curled her lip, eyes indifferent. Honestly, no, I don't have the time to care about your feelings. I care about my position. I need Max to believe I'm the only one who truly understands him, who stands by him. She flicked her hair back, her bracelet jingling softly. Haven't you noticed he argues more with you lately? Goes quiet when you talk, tells you not to worry so much. That's all me. A chill crept down my spine. Everything suddenly fit. The way Max avoided my eyes, the late nights he came home barely speaking, the way he gently brushed my hand off his shoulder, every bit of it traced back to Lena's whispers. The bond between mother and son pulled apart by the hand of an outsider, and my son didn't even realize it. What else did you tell Max about me? I asked, my voice lower now, steady. Lena leaned back staring at the ceiling like she was recalling scenes from a play. I said you like playing the victim, that you crave pity, that you use money to keep him close. I told him that if he didn't become independent, you'd always use money to control him. Men hate feeling controlled, so he got angry with you. I clenched my hands so tightly, my nails dug into my palms. You call what I did control? Lena turned to look at me, her smile fading. Think what you want, but in my eyes, anyone who gives that much wants power in return. I don't like owing anyone, so if that person ends up being seen as the villain, it makes things easier for me. That confession made my chest tighten. What I saw as kindness, she saw as chains, and the only way she could break free was to turn me into a villain in her story. I felt both hurt and absurd. So to avoid a debt, you'd rather let people believe terrible things about your husband's mother? Lena shrugged, her voice cold. Better than letting you stand over me. The room fell silent for several seconds. I could hear the distant hum of the fridge. Everything around us was the same, except one thing had changed completely. My view of the girl in front of me. I used to think Lena was just selfish, lazy, and ungrateful, but tonight I saw her clearly. She was calculated, ruthless, and willing to distort any relationship that stood in her way. I lifted my head and looked her in the eye. Do you realize what you've destroyed besides my image? In Max's eyes, Lena smirked unfazed. You mean the mother-son bond? Don't throw around big words to guilt me. If that bond breaks from a few words, maybe it wasn't as strong as you thought. That sentence made me exhale long and deep, a blend of pain and clarity. I understood then that I hadn't lost Max solely because Lena was cruel, but also because I had let things slip off balance without realizing. I'd let my love become entangled with money, let my sacrifices become so routine that my son assumed they were owed. And Lena had used that crack to wedge herself in. "What else did you say to Max?" I asked again, this time with every word calm and clear. Lena swirled the water glass between her fingers, then smiled thinly. "More than you think." After the night Lena got drunk and exposed every dark corner of her scheme, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. It felt like a noose had wrapped around my neck, tightening with every breath, and if I kept enduring, I would be the one to pull the final knot. The next morning, after sitting by the window for a long time, I decided to call Max and Lena into the living room. No detours, no delay. I needed to hear from my own son about where he placed his mother in his life. Max came out first, his shirt still wrinkled from rushing. He looked at me slightly surprised to see my face colder than usual. Lena followed her gaze, distracted, but I knew she was watching every flicker of my reaction. I asked them both to sit. Max sat next to his wife, leaning slightly toward her as if to signal unity. Memories of raising Max through the years flashed in my mind like a blade turned inward. I spoke slowly and firmly. "I want us to talk. Seriously. I heard many things last night, and I need to hear the truth from both of you." Max frowned slightly annoyed. Lena placed her hands on her thighs, her silence calculated. I turned to Max. "Do you think I've changed lately, or do you believe what Lena said about me is true?" Max leaned back, his tone suddenly distant. "You're overthinking, Mom. You've been imagining things. Lena didn't say anything out of line. You're misunderstanding." Each word hit my chest like a stone. I looked at him, feeling the gap between us stretch farther with each breath. "You're saying I'm imagining things?" I repeated the words, unfamiliar and painful. Lena suddenly covered her face, bursting into loud sobs, louder than necessary, shrill and theatrical. I observed her every move, each tear that hit the table, as though deliberately placed for sympathy. Max turned to hold her shoulder, gently rubbing her arm, forgetting I was even there. "See, Mom," Max said, not looking at me, "you're putting too much pressure on Lena." Lena lifted her face, tears streaming, but her eyes were alert enough to glance at me with a faint, hidden smile, as if watching the final piece of her plan fall into place. "I didn't want to say this," she sobbed, "but you've made me look bad. People at my company talk. They say I'm a homewrecker, that we rushed the wedding because you wouldn't accept me." I stared directly at Lena. "Who told you that?" Lena pressed her lips together, feigning pain. "Everyone. My friends. They think I broke up a family, that you weren't allowed to host the wedding. They say I disrespected you. That's why you banned me." Her voice cracked, squeezing Max's hand. "I've had enough." Max turned to me. "Do you see what Lena has gone through? You've pushed us to this point." I could hardly believe my ears. "I?" Max sighed, like dealing with something tiresome. "You need to calm down. You're stressing Lena out. You're putting me in a tough spot." I looked at my son, saw how his eyes clung to Lena's every breath, every movement, as though she were the compass to his behavior. And me, the woman who birthed him, raised him, stood by him for 30 years, now sat like an overlooked background character. That brutal truth froze me in place. I took a deep breath, kept my tone low and steady. Lena told me she was the one who kept you from inviting me to the wedding. She admitted she fed you false stories to distance you from me. Lena looked up, realizing I had moved one step ahead, but only for a second. Then she dropped her face again, voice trembling. I didn't know you thought I was that cruel. I never said that. You did, I said flatly. Max frowned. You're putting words in her mouth. Lena never said such things. I turned to him. You know I've never lied to you. Max furrowed his brow, but averted his eyes. Lena wiped her tears, her voice cracking. I just told Max I was under pressure, that I was tired of being judged. I had no reason to come between you. I looked at her, trying to keep calm, but unable to hide the growing sharpness in my voice. Last night, you told me straight that you didn't want me at the wedding. You bragged about what you said to Max to make him misunderstand me. You even laughed. Lena shook her head frantically, tears falling, but her gaze unwavering. I was drunk. You misunderstood. I don't remember anything. Max placed his hand on her shoulder, his tone defensive. That's enough, Mom. You're putting too much pressure on Lena. I heard the collapse inside me, shards of glass falling sharp and cold. I wondered how long Max had sat in this position, between his wife and mother, but with a heart already tilted to one side. Do you still believe me? I asked. Max stayed silent, a silence as long as a tunnel with no end. Then he spoke, voice low and guarded. I believe you, but you're making things worse. You seem obsessed with thinking Lena is hurting you. You need to reflect. I looked into his eyes, searching for something familiar, but all I saw was a stranger with no memory of who I was. Lena leaned against Max's shoulder, glancing at me as if to say, See, I won. My hand went numb, not because of Lena's words, but because Max repeated exactly what Lena had said the night before in her drunken haze. You're imagining too much. Those words didn't come from nowhere. They were planted, and I knew exactly who planted them in my son's mind. I took a deep breath, trying to summon the last calm I had left. I looked at both of them, their faces, their posture, their expressions. Lena still wept, Max still protected, and I sat in that void like someone witnessing the funeral of a trust I had nurtured for 30 years. When did you stop listening to me? I asked softly. No blame, no plea, just needing to know. But Max didn't answer. He looked down at his hands, clenched them, then released. Lena looked at me, a faint smile behind her tears, just enough for me to see who truly controlled the room. I stood up, gently pushed the chair back. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I knew I had entered the point of no return. Max looked up, slightly confused. Lena stopped crying, eyes watchful. From now on, I won't explain any more, I said slowly, each word clear. I'll let the truth speak for itself. Lena blinked quickly. Max exhaled, unsure of what I was planning. But I knew. Some things don't need debate. Some things need time and evidence. And some truths, once revealed, turn into a verdict. I turned and walked out of the living room. After the confrontation that turned into a trial of me right in my own home, I couldn't sleep for many nights. Not because of Lena's fake tears, nor because of Max's denial, but because of a quiet truth pressing against my chest. For 3 years, I had abandoned all personal needs, cut spending, worked overtime, and given up the trips I deserved, just so Max and Lena could live more comfortably. And in return, I was treated as an endless provider, a money-spending machine, nothing more, nothing less. That morning, as sunlight hit the corner of the dining table, I brought out all the papers, bills, and bank records and laid them in front of me. I wasn't in the habit of calculating things with my children, but this time I needed to know how far I had gone, how long I had let others walk all over me. I opened each transfer record, cross-checked every payment for rent, utilities, insurance, repairs, shopping, and medication. The numbers lined up cold and indifferent, like Lena's expression whenever she looked at me. I sat for 3 straight hours, didn't stand, didn't drink water, just wrote, calculated, then wrote again. When the final total appeared on the screen, I had to take a deep breath before daring to look directly at the number. 3 years, 36 months. And the total amount I had spent on Max and Lena was $33,400. That number said nothing about wealth or poverty. It only revealed one undeniable truth. I had turned myself into a means of survival for 2 people who never intended to return even a shred of decency. I leaned back in my chair. The room was bright, but I saw darkness. A chill spread from my hands to my chest because I realized the most important thing. I wasn't hit, threatened, or imprisoned, but I had been drained to exhaustion by an invisible force called indifference. Lena didn't need to scream in my face. She only had to fake fragility, shift the burden to me with a few weary, dependent words. Max didn't need to argue. He only had to stay silent while I pulled out my wallet, did everything, and traded my freedom for their comfort. I braced my hands on the table. A surge of anger rose not at them, but at myself. Why did I believe I had a duty to sacrifice without limits? Why did I think love meant giving away everything I had without hesitation? 3 years passed in depletion, hidden under blind compassion. And now the truth appeared like a cracked mirror, forcing me to look directly at myself before I looked at them. I stood up, grabbed my purse, locked the door, and went downstairs. I walked straight to the bank. A familiar road, familiar steps, but this time my heart felt strangely light, not out of relief, but because for the first time in years, I knew I was doing the right thing for myself. At the bank, I told the employee I wanted to cancel all automatic transfers. She asked if I was sure, as those payments had been ongoing for a long time and seemed important. "I'm sure," I replied without hesitation. It took only 10 minutes. 10 minutes to end 3 years of self-inflicted exhaustion. 10 minutes to decide that I would no longer let emotions become the rope that tied me down. When I signed the final document, my hand trembled slightly, but it was from release. As I walked out of the bank, it felt like I had dropped a boulder my shoulders had carried for far too long. I walked home slowly, but my mind hadn't fully detached from the truth just revealed. I thought about how Max always said, "Mom, don't worry so much," and how Lena steered conversations to make me feel guilty. I thought about the times I tormented myself, believing I wasn't good enough, when in reality, I was the only one trying to hold together a home, being stripped of meaning by 2 ungrateful people. When I got home, I took off my shoes, set my purse on the table, and took a deep breath. The apartment was still quiet, but it no longer felt cold and empty like before. Something in the air had changed. Not because the house changed, but because I had. I sat on the sofa, hand over my chest to calm my heartbeat. A second later, my phone vibrated. Max had texted. I opened it. A single message, short, concise, but heavy enough to squeeze my heart. "You're tearing this family apart." I stared at the screen, my heartbeat slowing. I read it again to make sure I hadn't misread. "You're tearing this family apart." The sentence struck like a verdict from the very son I once saw as my pride. Not Lena, not an outsider, but Max believed I was the problem, the cause of the fracture Lena had seeded in his mind. I set the phone on the table, my heart stilled like a lake covered in thick fog. I knew this message didn't come from Max's reason. It came from twisted stories, whispered poison, the manipulations Lena had steadily carried out over 3 years. But knowing is one thing, feeling is another, and I felt like someone had just crushed my heart with their bare hands. I closed my eyes, leaned my head against the sofa. The words tearing apart echoed in my mind like a crashing noise. Tearing apart, not because of what I did, tearing apart because I dared to stop, dared to reclaim what was mine, dared to cut the invisible thread they used to bind me. In Max's eyes, I was no longer the mother trying to preserve, but the one disturbing the comfort his life depended on. I reopened the message and let the sting spread through my chest. But after that sharp cut, I understood one thing. If a family is built on my money and someone else's lies, then it's no longer a family. I returned home that afternoon, not even having had time to figure out how to respond to Max's message when I noticed the front door slightly ajar. A chill shot down my spine. I distinctly remembered locking it before leaving. Stepping inside, I froze. Max was sitting on the sofa. Lena stood with her arms crossed by the dining table, and beside them was an unfamiliar man with slicked back hair and thin glasses, flipping through my paperwork as if taking inventory of a soon-to-be seized estate. No one asked why I was entering my own home. They acted like they had been waiting for me. Max looked at me with a mixture of anger, reproach, and something I could no longer identify as familial affection. Lena wore a faint smirk, the kind of smile one has when a script is ready and they're just waiting for the lead to walk in. The man set down his pen, stood, and extended his hand. I'm Fisher, the family's attorney. I didn't shake it. I pulled back the documents they'd been flipping through. Who gave you permission to be in my house? I asked, keeping my voice steady enough not to tremble. Max sighed as if I had just caused an inconvenience. Mom, we had to come in because you weren't answering the phone. We were worried. Lena jumped in immediately afterward, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes full of calculation. We were afraid you might do something irrational again. I glanced around. The filing cabinet had been open drawers pulled out and financial documents scattered. This wasn't a concern, it was a search. I sat in the chair across from them, placed the stack of documents on the table, and held their gaze without flinching. Explain. Max hesitated for a few seconds before saying, You stopped the transfers. You gave no reason. That made us and the lawyer think you're not stable. His words stunned me. I let out a soft laugh, not from amusement, but from disbelief at the audacity. Not transferring money means I'm unstable. Lena looked at Max, signaling for him to stay silent so she could take over. Renee, you've lost control of your finances. When the elderly become confused, this is what they do. Attorney Fisher stood and handed me a thick folder. These are the authorization documents. We propose that you transfer asset management to Max and Lena temporarily until you recover. This is for your own good. I opened the folder. The very first sentence made my blood run cold. Full authority over all personal assets, including residence, bank accounts, and financial decision-making. If I signed, I'd lose everything instantly. Who drafted this? I asked. Fisher replied calmly, almost eerily so. I did, based on practical needs and your mental condition. My mental condition? I looked him straight in the eye. And what exactly are you basing that on? Fisher pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Your son is concerned that you are no longer of sound mind, that you've shown erratic behavior, and ceasing transfers without notice is one of the signs. Max lowered his head, avoiding my eyes. I asked again, You're saying I'm not of sound mind? Max swallowed, then gave a faint nod. In that moment, all I felt was a vast, irreparable void opening between a mother and her child. Lena stood up, walked around behind me, and spoke in a soft tone that sounded like comfort but sliced like a knife. "Renate, just sign. The house, the money, Max will take care of it. You'll live in peace. It's simple." I turned to look at her. "Take care? Who took care of everything for the last 3 years?" Lena sneered. "That shouldn't be brought up. Old people cling to the past too easily." I inhaled deeply, stopping myself from rising. I understood exactly what they wanted, not to care for me, but to take what was mine. I flipped through the pages, scanning what Fisher had prepared. Every section was carefully worded to frame me as someone in need of guardianship. All of my rights, from withdrawing funds to selling my home, were to be transferred to Max. I set the folder down. "I am healthy, lucid, and capable of managing myself. You have no right to force this." Fisher responded mildly, "We're simply preventing a dangerous situation. Your mental state is a serious concern." Lena laughed, a sharp sound like shattering glass. "Do you want us to say everything the neighbors say? You talk to yourself? The pharmacist says you buy random meds. The bank clerk says you forgot to sign the register. We've collected it all to help you." I stood silent for a few seconds. I knew they were fabricating, twisting half-truths into weapons to back me into a corner. But hearing Lena say it aloud still left me stunned. The depth of her calculation had far exceeded what I imagined. I looked at Max. "You believe this, Max?" Wouldn't meet my gaze. "You've changed so fast. I just want to be sure." I let out a sad laugh. "Fast? I supported you both for 3 years. One day I defend myself and I'm labeled crazy? Does that make sense to you?" Max frowned, visibly irritated. Lena jumped in. "There she's raising her voice again. That's instability." "Fisher, do you see?" Fisher placed his hand on the table. "If you don't sign willingly, we can petition the court for guardianship. You'll lose all authority." I stayed silent for a few moments. I felt like a small room was gradually being locked up, windows sealed, doors bolted, and every lock bore the names Max and Lena. I was being cornered by the very people I once loved most. I stood up, not loudly, not trembling. "You will leave my house right now." Fisher replied, "That's not a wise resolution." I repeated each word clear and firm. "Get out of my house." Lena folded her arms and smiled coldly. "You think you still have the authority to order anyone?" Then she stepped closer, leaned in until her breath, faintly smelling of alcohol, brushed my ear. After Lena leaned in and whispered a line into my ear like a poisoned needle, I understood that if I didn't stand up right away, I'd lose everything, including the right to breathe in my own home. The next morning, I called a locksmith to replace every lock from the front door to the back, then hired a tech crew to install a full camera system around the house. Each screw driven into the frame felt like a declaration that I wasn't retreating. I called Attorney Weber, the man who had helped me handle my late husband's will. When I told him everything, he was silent for a long moment, then said, "You did the right thing. From now on, I'm here to protect you." Together, we began gathering every piece of evidence related to Max and Lena's trespassing threats, coerced signatures, and false claims about my mental health. Weber took meticulous notes, occasionally asking questions that made my skin crawl because they revealed just how grave the situation truly was. As he laid out the next steps, I saw how cunning the pair had been. They didn't just want money, they wanted to strip me of every ounce of agency. Weber rested his hand on the folder and said quietly, "This is no longer a family matter. This is a premeditated attack." It didn't take long for Max and Lena to strike back. One afternoon, I was watering the front yard When Mr. Davis, my across-the-street neighbor, stood watching me with arms folded and a scowl on his face. He'd never been friendly, but this time the hostility was unmistakable. Someone had stirred him up. I approached to ask what was wrong, and he snapped, "You put up cameras to spy on the whole neighborhood again. Lena says you're so paranoid, you're afraid of your own shadow." I froze, not because of his words, but because I realized how effective Lena's poison had been. Just a few veiled comments, and people were ready to believe the widowed old woman had lost her mind. I went back inside and told Weber about the encounter. He nodded as if he had expected it. "They'll need witnesses to paint you as unstable. They'll use Mr. Davis." I asked, bitter and angry, "Doesn't he find this strange? I've lived here for years. They just moved in." Weber replied calmly, "People who get flattered easily are the first to believe stories that boost their ego. Davis likes to feel like he knows more than others." The next day, Weber received a handwritten statement that Max had filed preliminarily. In it, Davis claimed, "I often stood mumbling in the yard, obsessed over camera feeds, and even accused me of calling him by the wrong name in the middle of the night." Every claim was false, but Weber saw its usefulness. The more exaggerated, the easier to disprove. Let them tie the noose themselves. Going to the pharmacy was another blow. I couldn't understand why Mr. Green, the pharmacist, suddenly avoided eye contact when I came in to buy vitamins. When I asked about a common medication, he hesitated. "You should check with your doctor. I'm not sure you're taking the right dose." I paused. The words were innocent, if not for the fear in his eyes. I left immediately and called Weber, who told me to return at once so he could speak with Green himself. When Weber asked about the abnormal behavior confirmation form Max had referenced, Green's face went pale. He confessed that Lena had visited days earlier, asked about my medication history, and implied I might be confused due to neglecting treatment for a chronic illness. She had him sign a paper she said was for insurance updates. He thought it was routine, never imagined it'd be twisted into evidence against me. Weber recorded the entire conversation, including Green's signed acknowledgement that he'd been misled. For the following week, I lived in a state of alert, like a bird that had just escaped a snare. But I didn't tremble anymore. I began documenting every suspicious sign as Weber advised. Each time Max's car slowed in front of my house, I filmed it. Every call from a strange number, I logged. Every rumor that reached a neighbor's porch, I wrote in my journal. I felt like I was building a wall of evidence, one brick at a time, to defend the life I had left. On Wednesday evening, Weber visited and placed a new file on the table. "Renate, you're doing very well. We've got solid evidence now. But I need you to understand they won't stop. Every piece of proof you gather scares them, and frightened people lash out." I looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. Once Max and Lena lost control, they would spread panic wherever they could, even to those who used to be my family. The next day, I heard voices murmuring outside the gate. When I checked the camera, I saw Mr. Davis talking to Lena. She stood at an angle, clutching her purse, speaking softly, but with the sharp gaze of someone directing a performance. I hit record, zoomed in, and saw her place a hand on his shoulder like she was making a heavy request. I couldn't hear every word, but the last sentence from Mr. Davis was crystal clear. "You can leave that to me." Later that evening, my next-door neighbor knocked. Mrs. Brooks, the one who often lent me pruning shears, looked at me with concern. "Renate Davis told me you're starting to forget things. He said I should be careful when speaking with you." I stopped in place. Mrs. Brooks didn't believe it, which is why she came to ask directly. I told her everything. When she heard they wanted Davis to testify, her jaw clenched. "I'll stand with you if it comes to that. You're sharper than most people in their 30s. That was the first time I didn't feel alone. One person believing me was enough to steady my heart. Every wound I carried felt touched by someone who said it deserved to be bandaged, not trampled. On the 10th day of this counterattack, my camera sent an alert movement at the front door. I checked and saw Lena standing there. She didn't knock. She stood still, head slightly bowed, as if listening for something. I saw her lips move, whispering, to the very camera she once tried to use against me. I turned on the audio, and her voice cut through me like a blade. "See you in court, mother." After the message Lena left on camera about meeting at court, I realized what I was facing had gone far beyond a family dispute. But even though I was prepared, I didn't expect the authorities to arrive this quickly. That morning, just as I finished brewing a pot of hot tea, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera to see who was outside. A woman in a gray coat holding a thick folder stood with the stance of someone on official duty. When I opened the door, she handed me a badge. "I'm Schmidt from Social Services. We're here following a report from your family." I paused. A report from my family? Schmidt stepped in with the attitude of someone who had already made up her mind. She sat at the table, opened the folder, and spoke in a tone that was both firm and gentle. "Mrs. Renee Richter, we've received a complaint that you're exhibiting signs of paranoia, financial mismanagement, and refusal of medical care." I looked at the folder lying before me, the words hitting like a hammer to my dignity. In that report, I was described as a confused elderly woman, incapable of caring for herself, spending money recklessly. I gripped the edge of the chair to stay calm. "Who reported this?" I asked. Schmidt replied, "Your son and daughter-in-law. They're concerned you're no longer lucid." My chest tightened as if something clamped around it. I thought I had endured enough pain from Max and Lena's words, but there was a deeper kind of pain, one that made your heart drop while you're forced to remain composed. Schmidt continued with questions like, "Have you ever forgotten to pay bills? Do you purchase medication without prescriptions? Do you feel like you're being watched?" I answered each question clearly and directly, but I saw no change in Schmidt's eyes. She looked at me the way someone would look at a patient. When she asked, "Did you install cameras because you felt threatened?" I replied, "I installed them to protect the house from people who've entered without permission." Schmidt stared at me for a long moment, then wrote something in the file. I understood instantly my answer had been twisted into something unfavorable. I straightened up, didn't tremble, didn't yield. I began to see why Weber said this would be the most dangerous phase. I asked Schmidt to wait in the living room for a few minutes while I called my lawyer. She seemed slightly annoyed but agreed, knowing that obstructing legal counsel could become a problem. I called Weber. After hearing just a few sentences, he immediately told me to keep Schmidt there and that he would arrive within 30 minutes. While waiting, I sat across from Schmidt, the two of us staring in silence. She maintained her professional demeanor, but something was chilling. She didn't look at me like a regular person. She looked at me like a file marked high risk. Weber arrived faster than I expected. When he walked in, the entire atmosphere of the house shifted. Schmidt stood to greet him, but Weber didn't let her take control of the conversation. He demanded the full report and went through it page by page, pointing out every inconsistency. Paranoia? Based on what? She installed cameras after Max and Lena entered her home without permission. That's a rational security measure. Schmidt opened her mouth to counter, but Weber raised his voice slightly. Erratic financial behavior? She stopped automatic transfers to her son. That's her right, not a symptom of illness. I looked at Schmidt. Her expression changed. The words in the report began to lose ground. Weber continued, "Who provided the medical information?" Schmidt said, "Pharmacist Green." Weber produced a recording and a signed statement from Green admitting he had been misled. Schmidt's face turned gray. "Who witnessed the alleged behavioral issues?" Weber asked. Schmidt replied, "Mr. Davis." Weber then presented a statement from Mrs. Brooks that refuted it completely. Schmidt was silent longer than before, then said, "I received a report from the family. I was obligated to respond." Weber replied, "And now you've seen the nature of that report." The air in the room felt heavy as lead. Schmidt looked at me again, but this time her eyes had lost the clinical scrutiny. She looked at me as someone caught in a calculated scheme. I didn't say a word. I just looked right back at her. Schmidt closed the folder more carefully than when she opened it. "Mrs. Richter," she said slowly, "I will record what I've observed today." Weber gave a small nod, like a man who had just won a chess match, knowing his opponent had no way out. When Schmidt stood to leave, she paused at the door and looked at me one last time. It wasn't the gaze of someone passing judgment anymore. It was the look of someone who realized they had stepped into something far more complex than a standard report. I stood up and saw her to the door. No thanks, no resentment. I maintained my silence with dignity. As the door closed, Weber turned to me. "Renate," he said, "this is no longer about forcing a signature. This is a full-scale campaign to prove you're legally incompetent. They're preparing to take you to court." A chill ran down my spine. I thought I was ready for anything, but when Weber said that, I knew this was no joke. This was a battle that could cost me everything if I made a single misstep. I sat down, clasping my hands tightly to stay grounded. I tried to recall every detail of the past few days. Lena's offhand remarks, Max's avoidance, Davis's look, the mistakenly signed document from the pharmacist, and the whispers they spread to neighbors. They didn't hit me with fists or insult me with words. They struck by crafting a world where I was seen as unstable, someone unworthy of trust. Weber placed the folder on the table. "We have the advantage," he said, "but you must understand they will escalate. When their first attempt fails, they'll try new tactics. You must stay strong." I nodded. I knew he was right. I knew Max and Lena weren't done, and the next moves would be even more ruthless. That afternoon after Weber left, I sat alone in the living room, watching the sunlight on the floor. Never before had my home felt so much like both a fortress and a battlefield. I took a deep breath to steady my heart. I was no longer young, but my clarity had never been sharper than it was now. That night, as I prepared to lock the door, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Richter, I will complete the report today." I recognized it as Schmidt. A few seconds later, another message came. "I can't say much, but be ready. They will go all the way." The day of the trial, I entered the courtroom with slightly cold hands but a clear mind. Weber walked beside me slow and steady, as if to remind me that today's battle was where everyone's mask would fall. Max and Lena had arrived earlier. I saw them standing close together, looking like a devoted couple concerned for an aging, confused mother. As I stepped in, Max immediately lowered his eyes, trying to avoid accountability, while Lena turned to dab the corner of her eye, preparing for an emotional performance. When the hearing began, Max was called to the stand first. He walked slowly, carefully composing the image of a son trying to save his mother. His voice dropped into a somber tone, like someone deeply wounded. "Your Honor," he said, "my mother used to be very sharp, very thoughtful. But recently, she's shown behaviors that have us extremely worried. She's withdrawn, stopped communicating, acted strangely, and refused professional help." Every word he spoke targeted my weakness, not the truth. Lena was called immediately after, eyes red as if she hadn't slept from worry. She clutched a tissue tightly and spoke with a trembling voice. "I love Mother Renate like my own, but she's become disoriented." She forgets to pay bills, buys the wrong medication, and installs cameras because she thinks someone's watching her. We just want her to get proper care. I watched her deliver these stories so smoothly that had I not lived with her for 3 years, I might have believed her myself. The judge took careful notes, and many in the courtroom went silent to absorb the heartfelt words. I could guess the looks directed at me, the kind people give when they think they're witnessing an elderly woman slipping into dementia, but I remained silent, staring directly at Max and Lena, wondering how long they had rehearsed to be able to stand here and speak these lines without their voices shaking. When the witness was called, Mr. Davis stepped up with the air of someone convinced he was doing the right thing. He claimed I once stood in the yard, muttering to myself that I watched the street through my cameras for no reason, that I yelled at the wind, thinking someone was following me. He spoke smoothly, each sentence laced with the tone of a concerned neighbor. I felt like he was performing a role Lena had assigned him, trying to turn me into a confused old woman. Weber didn't interrupt. He let Davis finish before rising to confront him. Pharmacist Green was also called. He approached the stand with a guilty look. He confirmed that Lena had once inquired about my medication history and that he had signed a document she gave him. But when asked why he signed it, he admitted he hadn't understood the purpose. Lena looked down at this but still tried to appear composed. Weber gave a slight smile because that testimony cracked a major hole in what Max and Lena had constructed. When the judge invited me to respond, I gripped the edge of the witness stand to anchor myself. I detailed how I had spent a total of $33,400 on Max and Lena over the past 3 years. I listed every payment, every phase, every late-night call where they claimed an emergency. The courtroom fell silent. No one expected the figure to be so high, and no one imagined a 71-year-old mother had spent 3/4 of her savings on 2 people who gave her nothing in return. When I spoke of feeling used, my voice didn't tremble, though my heart tightened. I recounted being treated like a cash machine locked out of my own son's wedding. I repeated Lena's special person remark, her drunken return home, bragging she had lied to drive Max away from me. Someone in the courtroom turned to look at Lena with a different expression. Weber stood beside me, taking notes on every subtle reaction from the courtroom. Weber then stood for the closing arguments. He opened his laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen. As the video began to play, I felt the entire room's breath pause. The footage showed Lena standing at my front door, her face smug, head tilted slightly like she was addressing the camera. The security recording was clear, undeniable, and her voice rang out sharp and cold as a blade. The property will be mine anyway. The courtroom buzzed. Max turned to Lena, his face pale. Lena jumped up, shouting that the video was doctored, but Weber presented the certification verifying its authenticity, untouched and original. Lena's face flushed red, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. The judge stared straight at her, the unspoken question hanging thick in the air. If she truly wanted to protect her mother-in-law, why say such a thing on her doorstep? Weber continued presenting evidence of the break-in, recordings of Davis admitting he was asked for a small favor, and Green's testimony about being misled. Every piece shown peeled away another layer of their facade. Max no longer looked at me, and Lena tried to maintain composure, but her hands trembled so violently that the tissue in her grip was shredded. In the end, Weber said just one sentence: "A sound mind never chooses to lose everything, but a person being exploited has no choice but to stand up and defend herself." Then he stepped aside, leaving the courtroom heavy with silence. The judge scanned the room before speaking. He said a final decision could only be made after further review, but today's presentation had fundamentally shifted the court's perspective. I saw his gaze linger a little longer on Max and Lena, as if he were seeing their true selves for the first time. Finally, he put down his pen and said, "Court is adjourned for deliberation." When the judge returned to the courtroom, every whisper fell silent. I remained where I was, my hand gently gripping the edge of the bench as if to keep myself grounded. I looked at Max and Lena from across the room. Max didn't dare lift his head, while Lena tried to maintain a calm facade, but I could see the layers of tension cracking across her face. I no longer pleaded, no longer hoped for remorse or change from them. All I wanted was for the truth to be restored to where it rightfully belonged. The judge opened the file, looked around at us, then read each sentence slowly, clearly, and firmly. After comparing the testimonies, examining the evidence, reviewing the file, and assessing Mrs. Renate Richter's cognitive capacity, the court concludes Mrs. Richter is fully competent. I heard each word like a cold wind sweeping through me, placing me back exactly where I belonged. No one had the right to doubt me anymore. No one had the right to use the word unstable to strip away the life I had built through a lifetime of work. The judge continued, "The petition for guardianship is denied. Max Richter and Lena Richter are issued a severe warning for attempting to exploit legal procedures to seize property." I looked at Max. He shut his eyes as if someone had hurled the truth at his face with force, a truth he had refused to confront until now. Lena stood frozen, her face pale. No more tears, no more playing the victim, no more quivering voice seeking pity. Every performance peeled off them like strips of paper being torn away. The court adjourned. No one came near me. Weber only placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and asked, "How do you feel?" I smiled. Much lighter, like I can finally breathe again. He nodded, and I walked out of the courtroom with a sense that my feet had found their weight again. I was no longer afraid, no longer torn, no longer haunted by the battle between love and resentment. Everything fell away from me softly like dust from a coat too old to wear. In the days that followed, I cleaned up the house. The home that once brimmed with love, that had raised Max, that held all my hopes when I gave my money and my heart to my child, now became a completed chapter. I packed each item into boxes, without regret, without pain. Every object I touched reminded me of the days I was treated like a walking wallet, a silent maid, a confused old woman in the corner. I no longer carried those memories. I sold the house. No hesitation, no looking back. I moved into a smaller apartment, brighter, quieter. Glass doors opened to a patio where soft sunlight came in each morning, and I lived at a pace that was slower, simpler, and unburdened. I hung new paintings, bought an easel, and kept a small radio to play classical music in the afternoons. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for anyone to come home, didn't worry about who ate what, didn't carry anyone else's responsibilities as if they were my own. I donated part of my savings to a fund protecting the elderly from financial abuse. Not to prove my goodness, but because I knew there were many like me, people who believed love could fix everything, only to be worn down by the indifference of their own kin. I couldn't save them all, but I could contribute so someone else wouldn't have to endure being called incompetent by their own child. Max and Lena vanished from my life like a door closing in the night. No apology, no explanation. People like them when their plans fall apart never dare to look back at what they've done. I heard from a few that they were struggling, having to manage on their own, pay rent on time, and cover expenses I once handled. They were learning the lesson I once wished they'd grasped more gently, but sometimes life only teaches through hard falls. I no longer resent them, not because I've forgiven, but because there is no room left in my heart to hold their shadows. Letting go made me feel light enough to see the world through new eyes. In the mornings, I sit by the window, make tea, and watch sunlight spill onto the table. At night, I walk in the small park near my home, chatting with a few new neighbors, none of whom know my story, none of whom look at me with pity. I have reclaimed my life, the one I lost when I gave everything to others. But the most important thing I've learned isn't the feeling of winning in court. What I've learned is that self-respect cannot be entrusted to anyone else. When I handed that power to Max and Lena, they turned it into a chain. When I took it back, every shackle fell away as if it had never existed. I came alive again from the very ashes they tried to bury me in. My story isn't meant to make anyone fear marriage or family, but to show that kindness must have boundaries, sacrifice must have limits, and love must be placed where it belongs. If you're going through something that makes you doubt your own worth, I hope my story serves as a reminder that you have the right to step back, to stop, to protect yourself. The day I moved into the new apartment, I thought everything had closed. I thought old chapters had been shelved high and sealed. I thought I could only move forward, that no one could pull me back into the darkness I had just escaped. But then one morning, right outside my door, I saw a letter. No sender's name, the handwriting all too familiar. I recognized it immediately, no guessing needed. The paper inside held just one short line. Mom, we need to talk. No signature, no promises, no explanation. Just a sentence, like a knock on a door I thought I had locked for good. I stood in the hallway, the letter trembling slightly between my fingers, wondering whether this conversation was the end of everything or the beginning of another crack forming, just as I had begun to rebuild my life. Do you think I should respond to that letter? If you've witnessed something similar, share your story. And if you want to follow this journey, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. I read every line because perhaps among them is someone walking the same path I once walked.